Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TSI ATSI ESSA designation overview for 2024. My name is Shirley Vargas. I'm the administrator for the Office of School and District Support, and I'm joined by my two colleagues. Derek, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Derek Ippenson. I am the Assistant Administrator in the Office of Coordinated School and District Support, and I'm the Director of Accountability.
Excellent. And Dottie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dottie Hoisman. I'm in the Federal Programs team, and I am the Assistant Administrator for Federal Programs, as well as the Title I Director. So glad to see so many this morning.
Excellent. So I'll share my screen now. A quick thumbs up if you can actually see it would be super helpful. Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, we will make sure that once this recording is complete, that we not only send it out to those of you that have registered, but we'll make sure that it's uploaded onto our AQuest webpage and share that information out afterwards. So that way, if you're listening to this in the future, you have found it. So yay. Okay, we have 1 hour today to talk about ESSA designations here. Whether you are brand new in your position, or this is the 20th time you've probably heard me or anyone from our team discuss and describe ESSA designations, we hope that you walk away with some either new information or affirming affirmation in the things that you are actively doing. But before we get into it, like any educator, right, we have a quick welcome inclusion activity. And what we'd like for you to consider are comparing two things. One are some topics here, like accountability, continuous improvement, data analysis, leadership, to a KitchenAid stand-up mixer. So if you're like me during the holidays, I love baking, and I have to find some analogy with the work and the things that I do and the things I do at home. So what I'd like for you to do is take about 60 to 90 seconds or so and complete this sentence stem. Insert a term from above, like accountability, is like the KitchenAid stand-up mixer because you're putting a bunch of things together and in the end, something comes out. It might be good, it might not be good, but we got what we got. So take about 60, 90 seconds, think about how you might want to fill in that sentence stem and just type into the chat quickly, and then I'll probably just highlight a couple that come up. Now, if you'd rather unmute and say it yourself, I'll allow it. Leadership's like a stand-up mixer. A lot of things go into the mix. Continuous improvement, like the stand-up mixer. When you mix things, something wonderful is created. Leadership is, yes, throwing in things at once. Sometimes you actually move the speed too quickly and have a mess to clean up. Ooh, that resonates a lot. Lovely. I'll read one more right quick. Continuous improvement is like KitchenAid stand-up mixer. You can mix a lot of different ingredients together until you get the perfect recipe. I love that. Awesome. Thank you all so much for indulging me in this welcome inclusion activity. It's just a nice little way to kind of prime ourselves for the conversation we're about to have. If you're just joining us, thank you. Welcome to our ESSA designation webinar. We're going to get right into it now. So we have 4 main objectives Similar if you were on last year, where we're focusing on the identification process exit criteria, but we're going to key in on TSI and ATSI, right? Because some of you might be here because you have just identified this year for TSI, or maybe you have an ATSI designation and you're wondering, gosh, how do I get off? Or when do I get off? What are requirements of myself and my school? We'll address some common questions we've received and some potential misconceptions, and share some resources, and obviously provide some time for you all to ask any questions you might have that are specific either to your own building or to a designation in general. To start with our segment here, we always like to start with what we have to do and why we have to do it, right? So we have both state and federal law that require us to create accountability systems that not only rate schools and districts, but also are able to meaningfully differentiate schools for a variety of supports. So that's what we get from our state statute 79760.06 and our ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, which is our education federal law. So we'll get right into classifications and designations. You might be wondering, well, I'm a great school and I have this TSI or ATSI piece. And that's because it's intentionally designed to be two separate systems, right? Classifications and designations are independent of one another. And that means a school could be a great school, an excellent school, and potentially have a designation of TSI for a student group or ATSI for a variety of student groups. And we'll see those momentarily here. So we show them to you so you can kind of see the 4 levels for our classifications, and then this pyramid structure meant to show how we then tier our supports, right? With priority schools being our most intensive level of support, then followed by comprehensive support and improvement, and then followed by our 2 designations that are focused on student group performance. So for state and federal accountability, you see here that for the federal designations are coming from the Every Student Succeeds Act. There are particular requirements that we must abide by as a state education agency, and only school districts receive designations, and that's both state designations or federal designations, right? Districts are not part of the designation component here. And the priority school designation, which is a state designation, comes from our priority school statute outlined there. A quick overview of where we are for this school year. You'll see that we remain with 3 priority schools. We have 72 schools this year that are identified for CSI or CSI ATSI, which I'll touch briefly momentarily. And then we have 247 schools that are identified to have either TSI or ATSI designation. And that has gone down over the years. So I just want to say that as a state, we're doing some really great work to address student group needs, and there's still some more work to be done. And hopefully by the end of our session today, you will have identified some new resources or affirmed the things you're already doing. So I keep saying these acronyms. What do they actually mean? So you'll see in the green text box, comprehensive support and improvement, there are 3 actually different versions of CSI. There's CSI low performing. These are our Title I buildings that are the lowest 5% in performance, and they're identified every 3 years. CSI low grad rate, any public school, regardless of your title status, if you have a high school graduation rate lower than 67%, for your cohort specifically, it's identified every 3 years. And then CSI non-exiting, or the newest designation that we have, CSI ATSI. If you had a student group that has not exited, you are elevated to this designation. The remaining 2 designations, TSI, targeted support and improvement, and ATSI, additional targeted support and improvement, really focus on student group performance. And in the gray box to your right, you'll see the 10 student groups that are under consideration, as long as there are 10 students that are full academic year in that student group, that your school would be, that we would be considering as part of this designation process. This is regardless of Title I status. So if you're sitting here and you're like, oh, I don't have a Title I building, how come I'm here? It's because you probably had 10 student groups in this, you probably had 10 students in that student group, excuse me, and you were under consideration and went through the filtering process, which we'll talk through momentarily. You might also be wondering, how are they different, aside from having an A in TSI, right? So you'll see that targeted support and improvement is an annual designation, and we're comparing the student group to the performance of the lowest 25% of Title I buildings. It should be considered as an early warning signal, right? This is a student group that may need additional support in your building. So while overall your school may be an excellent school or a great school or good, right, whatever the case is, there's at least one student group in your building that is just needing additional support. And this student group is eligible to exit every year. You're either on or you're off, right? For ATSI, it's a little different, right? The comparison group is actually the CSI schools, which are lowest 5% of Title I schools. And this designation occurs every 3 years. It happens when CSI schools are identified because that's the comparison group. It's a more urgent designation because if things do not improve for that student group, that school becomes a CSI school. We also want to consider ATSI that this student group, it's a more urgent designation because if this student group in and of themselves were a school building, they would be eligible for the CSI designation. And that is very important to understand. Lowest quarter for TSI, lowest 5% for ATSI. And then ultimately, if the school does not improve, like I've mentioned already, we move into the CSI designation. There are also some additional requirements, which we'll get to momentarily. So how do we actually arrive to the school being or student group being identified? So what I'll share with you in the next subsequent slides are actually the designation process. Again, if you joined us last year, you've probably seen these numbers and seen this, you've experienced this already, but I want to go ahead and revisit this again so we have a clear understanding of how we have arrived to the designation, and also so that you can refresh your memory on how we engage in the filter process. So we first have to understand that all public schools are under consideration here, as long as they have 10 students in each of the student groups that are here. So what I mean is we are looking at a giant Excel sheet with over 10,000 rows of information, right? There are a lot of information that we are reviewing for every school. And the first thing we need to ask is, are there in fact 10 students? So in my hypothetical Nebraska middle school, serving 400 students, grades 6 through 8, you'll see my little Excel sheet here. There are some students that are excluded because I do not have at least 10 students in that student group. So those are highlighted in yellow are under consideration. So now we get into the filter. Our first stage is really thinking about and looking at performance on NSCAS, ELA and math, general and alternate, as well as progress towards English language proficiency. These two are held the same weight, if you will. The U.S. Department of Ed has made it very clear that while performance on ELA and math are super important, so is ensuring that our English learners are acquiring English on track for whatever their language acquisition timeframe is. And the comparison group, as you can see here for TSI, is the lowest quarter of Title I schools. So we ask ourselves these questions, and then we see, well, where did my students actually fall? You'll see that the numbers I'm pulling from where it says stage 1 status, stage 1 ELP, are actually from the 2023 ESSA designation business rules. Those business rules are in effect until we re-identify CSI schools in 2026. And that is the same process we will continue to use into the future. You'll see here that of the student groups that were eligible, only 4 remain eligible, because we'll see that those that were identified of race and ethnicity white, right, actually exceeded the threshold for status. Whereas the other student groups did not meet the threshold, so they continue to be under consideration. For stage 2, now we're looking at academic progress. So are students meeting or exceeding growth thresholds or non-proficiency thresholds? And in this instance, I don't need both to be true, right? So if in fact there is, you'll see for English learner, you'll see that while the student group for English learners did not meet the growth threshold, which was 64.67%, my students were at 60%, they exceeded the non-proficiency threshold, which means they are no longer in the running for this level of designation. Whereas my students who identify as Hispanic, you'll see that unfortunately, both were low, so they will continue to be under consideration, right? And the same thing for the students with disabilities student group. And then lastly, we're looking at reduction in chronic absenteeism as well as science proficiency. And those are for the only tested grades. So in my middle school, only students in grade 8 are going to be under consideration for science status there. So what we see here is that the students who are Hispanic did not meet the threshold for a reduction in chronic absenteeism. So as a reminder for chronic absenteeism here, we are looking at the difference between your actual chronic absenteeism rate and the target rate that was established by your 21-22 chronic absenteeism. And we are constantly looking at reduction over time, which is in alignment with our state board goal of reducing chronic absenteeism by 50%. Okay. And then you'll see for science, the threshold was 60.87%. And you'll see where both of those student groups performed. So in the end, we end up with these two student groups are identified for TSI. This means that next year, using this year's data, we will look at these student groups again and see, did they exit, or is there a new batch of students that potentially are identified? And it's just an ebb and a flow, but it should be an early warning signal for me and my school team to understand what are some areas of improvement and areas of strength for these particular student groups. For visual purposes, this is our ATSI filter. You'll see the comparison group right down here, which is the CSI group. And then there's a slightly different filter for high school, where we're seeing the inclusion of graduation rate in the middle.
Shirley, before you go
yeah,
on, it's a good question that somebody asked in the chat. So really loved, Stuart said he loved the example and explanation. And can schools see their data in this same way?
Great question. Thank you. So schools probably might not be able to see their data exactly in the same way. If that is something that they would like to see, I'm going to highlight Derek now. As a school would be able to request that information, we could definitely share that for you. I will say we are actively working towards how to make these reports more visible and easily accessible for schools on NEP. I think that is a future feature that is coming. It can't come fast enough, obviously, but if that is something that you would like to dig in further, definitely Derek will be the person that can get you that information. Feel free to inundate him with all the emails. Thank you for that question. So let's talk about requirements and opportunities for TSI, right? Because nobody likes to have a label. Nobody really wants to be identified for anything like how, that's not super helpful, but there is an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity to really focus on a student group or a couple of student groups that may be in your school, any additional support to improve, right? So what are the requirements? First and foremost, TSI and ATSI are district-led improvement efforts. What this means is that the state is required to communicate with districts of the schools that have a designation, and then the school district is required to notify the school, right, the actual building, of the designation. The school district is required to support the school with creating a plan for improvement, and the school district is required for monitoring the implementation of that plan, right? This is really meant, like I mentioned in previous slides, like an early warning signal, or in ATSI, a more urgent designation, where the district serves as the first line of support, if you will. Now, the opportunity that lies here is that first and foremost, if a school is in fact creating a brand new plan, which we're going to talk about here momentarily, you shouldn't create a brand new plan. You're not submitting any plans to the NDE, right? Not to meet this requirement, not to meet the requirement of TSI and ATSI. We're also strongly encouraging schools and districts to leverage already existing plans, right? So that it is very clear the goals and strategies and objectives that as a school and a district you're attempting to meet. So for example, regardless of your student group, you might consider leveraging your continuous improvement or NEMTS or MTSS plan, right? Obviously in Nebraska, we talk about NEMTSS and continuous improvement as one and the same. So if you have one plan already, you would want to consider, how do we leverage this already existing plan and the school building address their already existing plan to meet the needs of the student group. Another might be, if you have a student group specifically for students with disabilities, how do you leverage your district's targeted improvement plan to focus deliberately in that building and in that student group and that data for that student group in that building. And then lastly, creating common goals that are nestled or corresponding to the larger improvement efforts in the district. So what do I mean by all of this? So here's an example. This is not an exemplar, it is an example, right? It will look and feel different in your building and in your district. But what we want to show you here is the coherence and cohesiveness that could exist if we're thinking about these things more together and have all the people together to have these conversations. So if as a district you have a goal and a priority to improve literacy scores for all learners, that might look like in your continuous improvement plan, you have your 5-year goal to meet a particular threshold of proficient readers, right? And you've done the math, you've done the study, and you see, great, we need to raise by 25%, so we are getting to over the 75% threshold. In your targeted improvement plan, which is specifically designed for students with disabilities, you might be focusing more deliberately on the students with disabilities and where they might be for their performance on NSCAS ELA, right? And then you'll see there around moving particular students in 5 years to on track or advance. And now for your school building level, right? Because all of these designations we've talked about thus far are school building. This might be a little bit more, might be more urgent and or you might not wait till 2029, or I don't want to say it like that. You might not necessarily create a goal till 2029. You might be creating a more immediate goal, right, for next school year. And that might look different from your TIP and your CIP goal because the numbers are different, the number of students are different. But the essence and all of these things are connected to literacy and improving literacy scores specifically for students with disabilities. Now, in my graphic here, you'll see it says CSI, CSI, ATSI. You can swap that out and say TSI. You can swap that out and say ATSI. But the point here is that at the very least, there are nestled goals, and it is clear that we are all working towards the improvement of reading and improving the reading of students with disabilities in my school building and in the district overall. Now, what steps we'll take, we'll come to that momentarily. But in terms of goal setting, this is an example of how that could look and feel. We talked a little bit about requirements. So I just want to quickly highlight what those requirements are, right? Because you'll see the last 2 rows there, last 2 columns there that are highlighted for TSI and ATSI and what is required and what's recommended. So if you're thinking about the previous slide, CIP and targeted improvement plan as an example, you're developing an improvement plan in partnership with all stakeholders. If your CIP and targeted improvement plan didn't include the building members or educators from the identified building, you may just want to have some follow-up conversation to address that, right? Are you required to have an improvement plan based on an annual comprehensive needs assessment? Not for TSI and ATSI. It's a recommended action. You are required to ensure that whatever plan you leverage is in fact informed by all accountability indicators, which we discussed earlier on. The improvement plan specifically for ATSI must identify and address any resource inequities that are found through a resource allocation review. I will discuss that in a subsequent slide. It must also identify evidence-based plans, evidence-based interventions or strategies. Your targeted improvement plan does in fact ask you to identify evidence-based strategies for students with disabilities, that is a great way to leverage that plan to address the needs of TSI or ATSI. And the last couple of things you'll see there, while there is no eligibility for federal funds, the approval of the goals and the plans and the monitoring of them is the responsibility of the district. Now you might be saying, Shirley, I'm a small district, so I'm doing all the planning, all the monitoring, everything all myself. So please leverage your ESU and regional and EMTSS leads to support you in developing systems that can help you sustain that over time. Resource allocation review. This is one we get a lot of questions about, and we want to make sure we provide as much guidance as we can to you all, since this is an action the district would be leading with the school building. When we talk about a resource allocation review, it is not just about how much money we do or don't have. While that is a very important feature, it is also about how we are using our human capital, how we might place our teachers, our support staff, and also how are we spending our time? How much time are students spending outside of a classroom? How much time are students spending in a classroom? How is our schedule designed in order to support literacy, right? If that's our focus as a school district. So what we do here and what we are providing as guidance, and you'll see a suggested process, is to form a team, right? First, who's going to be engaging in these conversations? And you'll see here that you might want to leverage an already existing team. So if you have a district continuous improvement team or a TSS committee or school, right? Whatever team is doing the work of strategically thinking about the immediate and near future of the success of the school and the children, that's the team that could be leveraged to do this work. You'll want to gather a lot of information that's necessary. So think about all the other plans that we haven't even discussed today. You may want to leverage those and bring those together. You'll want to think about district and school budgets. You'll want to think about educator effectiveness data and bring all this information together and engage in a really deep, meaningful conversation about what might be contributing to the outcomes that you're seeing for the specific student group that was identified. You want to capture those findings in whatever plan you have, right? So we gave you an example here of how that might look like. So in this example, staffing was an issue. So what the team ended up writing about was some decisions were shifted so that we can identify additional needs. For example, multilingual specialists or interventional specialists at the different schools or grades. And then like with any process you do, you want to monitor and adjust based on reflection and data.
Shirley, could I add something? I think the two things that you talked about there, the shifting is critical for that component, and then the collaboration is the other piece that are just critical to determining how you're helping support those kids in the building. So again, Shirley's right. It's not about we need more money. It's more about shifting and collaborating and involving your stakeholders within the building.
And Donnie knows, and we all know, money is helpful, right? But it's not the only thing. So we want to make sure, how can we be more strategic about that? So thank you for adding that, Donnie. The other major requirement I wanted to highlight was on evidence-based strategies and interventions. The Every Student Succeeds Act delineates specific 4 levels of strategy, 4 levels of evidence that should be considered, right, when you're thinking through. You've identified your problem statement, you've identified a goal, what are you going to do about it? More often than not, unfortunately, as educators, we want to just go in and solve the problem, whatever it takes, which is wonderful. And we also know what works. We also know what's been proven. So we want to make sure we're supporting our educators and our leaders to make the best decision possible. So what we want to do is make sure we're grounding these things in evidence-based strategies. And what you see, the first bullet point there, the NEMTSS program comparison tool, super amazing tool that not only has resources to help you engage in the conversation about how do I identify an evidence-based strategy and what will be best given my context, it also provides a ton of resources that are actually currently being used throughout our state. So it not only provides national research and evidence, but it's also very clear when you go on that page that you can see these are resources that are actually used by our own Nebraska schools. So it's a really great way to kind of see, well, what is everyone else out there using The other two web pages are also really amazing resources that come from, you'll see evidence for ESSA and What Works Clearinghouse, which is part of the U.S. Department of Education, where houses a lot of these research and evidence-based pieces. One thing I will say, it is very possible that you might in fact be attempting a strategy or intervention that has yet to be graded, if you will, as strong evidence or moderate or promising evidence, which is at level 4, demonstrating a rationale. This means that there has been some research, but not necessarily been experimental research to say it's been supported through a randomized controlled trial. And typically we like to steer people away from this one, but we also know that it's very possible that if you're working with a particular student group or strategy or intervention that maybe hasn't demonstrated a strong rationale just yet, a strong evidence base just yet, that level 4, which is usually referred to at level 4, demonstrates a rationale, has a strong theory of action. And as a district, you'll want to engage in conversations about where are the evidence-based strategies you're currently using or thinking about using. Okay, so that's all good to know, but what does it mean to get off this list? When am I eligible to get off this list? And what are some possible resources in the meantime to support me and my school to improve outcomes for the identified student groups? And that's what we'll talk through in this last segment here. So what we wanted to do here was to demonstrate a little bit more of how the exit process goes and also like the timelines of this. You will see that TSI is not on this list because if you can recall, TSI enters and exits every year. If a school is TSI and does not exit in a year or 2 years, there's no, the next step is not another designation, right? It is possible, however, that if over time that student group doesn't perform, you might end up finding yourself as an ATSI designation, but that's a different story. What I want to highlight for you here is that there may be some of you here that were identified in 2023 as ATSI. And you'll see that if you were, that's the most recent cohort, if you were identified and that is the last row, you have that designation for 3 years. You are eligible to exit in 2026, okay? However, if you were identified in 2022, and this is what we unfortunately call quote unquote pandemic cohort, this cohort is eligible to exit every year. The only reason for that case, and it's same for CSI, even though there probably shouldn't be any CSI schools here, but if you are listening in the future, if you're a CSI cohort 2, these 2 cohorts were identified during a time in which we were able to receive a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education for our assessments and all of these things. And the piece there was, we had one of 2 choices. One was give the school 1 year to improve or more egregious actions occur, right? Like you move up in a designation, or give a school 4 years to exit. And then things will, if a school doesn't exit, then they move into another level of designation. So what you see here, a lot of these things are culminating in 26, 27. And that is why you'll see those components there. So cohort 2 for ATSI, if you identified in 2022, and on NEP Secure, you would see in a parentheses that it would say 2022 or 2023, and that will determine your year of exit, basically. Okay. So I just described not being re-identified as TSI as the exit. For ATSI, it's a little bit more intricate. First, when we went through that filter, you want to make sure that student group is not re-identified, meaning we go through all of the stages. Secondly, we compare, whenever the initial year was of identification, we compare that current year to the initial year, only in stage 1, which is status and progress towards English language proficiency, if applicable. Sufficient growth means any positive change in performance. If you saw the designation rule, business rules, if you saw our little chart, we go to like maybe 7 or 8 decimal places, right? So we are when we talk about any positive performance, it makes a difference, right? And that's what we're looking at. We want to make sure we provide every possible opportunity for a school to demonstrate growth. Now, I want to make sure that it's clear that it's important to obviously continue to support students to make as much growth as possible, but we also want to make sure that schools don't feel like they're in a designation for a long period of time, right? So making sufficient growth is really any positive change in performance in that stage. And then lastly, I've had a couple of questions in the past couple of weeks, so I want to make sure I clarify this. If a school was identified for ATSI and they no longer have at least 10 students in that student group at the time of exit, they automatically exit that designation. So I need to go back to illustrate this example a little bit further. So if you are in cohort 3, so you were identified in 2023, you're currently in year 2, and let's say in year 2, you have 9 students that are English learners. There's nothing I can do about that. In year 3, you still have 9 students, right? That now matters because we are using the 26 year data, right, to exit in 2026. So that means that school is eligible to exit. You are ineligible to exit in year 2, so you remain in that designation, right? It's only up until the time of your exit that the end size is taken into consideration. Unlike year cohort 2, 2022, if they had 9 students now, they would have exited right now, right? So I wanted to clarify that because we did get a couple of questions of folks of like, oh, well, we don't have 10 students this year, but if you're in cohort 3, there's nothing we can do about that. You continue to support that student group, obviously, and do all the work you need to do until you're eligible to exit, and then we make sure that you actually, in fact, meet or do not meet that end size threshold. So what are resources that are available to supporting meeting the requirements, ensuring that there's a plan in place, and also just continuing to get further information? First and foremost, these arrows mean the images are clickable. So we spent some time the last couple of months getting some feedback on federal designation overview and support guidance. This is just a quick, I say quick, but it's like 20 pages. But it is a quick snapshot of all of the different designations, requirements, and planning for improvement that a school and district may consider reviewing to better understand everything that was just discussed today. Resource allocation review guidance, as well as a district level guidance for plan identification. So early on, we said we strongly encourage schools and districts to leverage existing plans. We also know that year over year, your administrators might change, things might happen, right? We lose papers, lose links, whatever the case might be. This document helps to at least codify the district, the school, the designation, and also helps to just put all the information in one location should you be monitored by the U.S. Department of Ed or by NDE throughout the time that the school has a designation. So it's just a great way to make sure you capture all of the requirements in one location. These are all optional documents. Okay?
Shirley, I'll put the link in the chat of all 3 of these documents.
Oh, perfect.
And I want to just make a plug for that first document. That was really well done. Shirley started that, and then the committee of practitioners reviewed it and gave input. I would just say that exactly what Shirley's talking about today and some of those graphics can be found in that document. So it's extremely helpful for understanding, because I know sometimes it feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose. And so that will help break it down even more.
Thanks, Debbie. I also, can you put the link to the PowerPoint as well? It's on slide 1. I'm sorry about that. I apologize for not providing that sooner. Okay. So what the next subsequent slides are specific to addressing some of the needs of different student groups. The first one here is addressing the needs of all of the student groups. Really thinking about what do we know about the student experience and the state of teaching and learning across all of our classrooms, right? TNTP's Opportunity Myth, which was actually done in 2018, but they've done some great follow-up work, right? Highlighted 4 key resources that were necessary to understand that student experience, but also contribute to increased achievement, especially for students who are starting the school year, a year or more behind, right? Strong instruction, deep engagement, great appropriate assignments, teachers with high expectations. The document that's highlighted here is just a reflection guide, right? To what extent do you and your school teams and your district's teams understand the state in which insert student group is being provided grade level content and assignments, right? To what extent does your school team, or teachers expect insert student group to perform on grade level for math and ELA, right? Right. It's all about really deeply understanding and strengthening tier 1 core instruction, since that is where the majority of the students are spending their time, right? So we want to make sure we are strengthening that every day and ensuring that teachers, students, and the content that they're learning, that instructional core, is kept at the center. Especially if the indicators that we've discussed to arrive to the designation focus on performance and growth on ELA, math, and science, on progress towards English language proficiency on the ALPA 21, as well as students attending school. Some resources for students with disabilities, wanting to make sure that we also highlight a variety of resources that we have here. First and foremost, you'll see foundational literacy routines. This is a great tool, not just for students with disabilities, but for all students in your buildings. But it's just a great document that you all can review to further deepen understanding and application of different strategies to support early literacy. You'll see the second document focuses on evidence-based practices for students with disabilities, but also for all students, right? What we know about a lot of evidence-based practices, that they may be good for one student group, but they're actually also differential impacts for multiple student groups. And then lastly is, how do we support our general educators in supporting instruction for students with disabilities in a general education classroom? So that is a great focus on the cycle of student support and pairing a special educator and a general educator together to strongly plan for instruction to meet the diverse needs of a variety of students. And then lastly, what I want to focus on here is for English learners. I'm sorry, I failed to mention there are many more resources on our special education webpage. And then lastly, for our English learners, I want to make sure that it's very clear there are English language proficiency standards that many of our general educators may or may not know. We want to make sure that when we're planning and preparing lessons and strategies and tasks for students, that we're also considering these standards. And you'll see that while the standards are linked here, we also have a really neat Canvas course people can take at their pace to truly understand not just the standards, but proficiency level descriptors on different tasks or modalities or things that teachers can use to support increased language acquisition in different grade bands and in different content areas. There's also some really great professional learning opportunities to understand academic language. And you'll see that on the NEMTSS page, we have some of those that are easily accessible. And then lastly, if you're wondering, I'm the only EL person in my school, or I'm in a low incidence school and I don't really know where to turn, or maybe I just want to keep learning more for myself, sign up for this amazing newsletter to truly understand what are some of the things that are being shared across the state and opportunities to collaborate with others so that you're not alone and you continue to build your network. As always, you can find more resources on our webpage. And then lastly, some additional links, a lot of our technical documents, as well as one-pagers and things that can help communicate a lot of these designations further, can be found on our AQuest webpage. Our school and district support webpage also houses the federal support guidance that he mentioned, as well as previously held professional learning sessions. And the NEMTSS webpage also highlights their framework and other professional learning sessions that are shared. So what I want to do now is, I know that the chat is open and available, but I would like to share this opportunity. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you all for joining us and taking some time out of your day. There is a feedback survey. Please complete the survey. It helps us to improve our delivery and our communication to you all. And we want to make sure we provide you with the best possible information. And if you have any specific questions you wanted to email us, you can, or I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and open up the virtual floor for any questions you all may have.
Shirley, I had a quick question about for TSI, you said multiple years, then they become ATSI. Is it 1 year of continued not making progress, or how is it? When does TSI move to ATSI?
It doesn't, but I was saying that if the performance of the student group over time continues to decline, it's possible that they might meet the threshold for ATSI instead. So
Okay.
there isn't a direct connection to anything if you're TSI. If you're TSI, you're TSI. Annual designation, you're on or you're off.
And then to your point about, you know, sometimes student groups change, things like that. What about Title I status for a CSI school that was designated CSI in a previous year, has not exited yet, but is now also no longer Title I? Is that just they still remain CSI but no funding, or?
So they do, let me make sure I just, there's a couple of things you sent us, I want to make sure. If you're a CSI school and throughout your time in the CSI designation, your title status changes, you still remain CSI because you were initially identified as a Title I building. Now, ATSI buildings or ATSI schools may or may not be Title I, but if they roll up to CSI, their Title I status is not taken into consideration because now they're in CSI status. They still remain eligible for funds and are still required to meet all the requirements that are outlined.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. Great questions. Thank you.
Shirley, where do I find from the ESU side, which schools of mine are ATSI or TSI or CSI?
Absolutely. Derek did share with every individual ESU a breakdown of that data. I can have him reshare that for you, Angie. Okay. It's also possible that there may be some ESUs that do not have a school with a designation. So if that's not highlighted, then it wouldn't be.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for being on with us this morning. I'm going to stop recording now. Hope you have a great day.
There